So Matt, what is the one thing that truly maximizes the value of someone's home when they go to sell their property?
Helping the buyer and the seller to win.
The buyer.
hmm I know it goes against the grain, and as an agent, our job is to get the best price, which I totally concur, and I'm all over that like a rash. But I also know, especially in the current market, that your buyer needs to feel like they've won as well. And that's not about underselling it. That's about understanding the emotional needs to buy that property and the commitment that's required. So for me, it's about helping buyers to win. I get asked this question all the time: what makes a great estate agent? And you help clients to feel like they've won. If they feel like they've lost, no matter what you do on that negotiation process, as soon as they put the phone down, 4 weeks down the line, if they feel they're overpaying for it, if they feel that certain things are still under their skin, you can lose deals. And I think it's really important to cover the ground, to make sure that the pathways, the understanding of needs are being met. And that's the emotion and logic put together, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's really interesting. No one so far has actually said specifically the buyer as well. But I do totally understand it, and and I think maybe sellers misunderstand actually the level of detail that goes in. So when you're talking about just like that there about the buyer, making sure the buyer also feels nice and gooey and excited and so on and so forth, and if they don't, and if that's not been expressed, you could lose a deal. I think I want to draw down on your experience to add weight to what you just said, because you were a director at Countrywide for quite a few years.
I was, yeah. I was a director, negotiator, manager, area manager. I T-boy. So yeah, I was there for about 17 years.
Yeah, so I mean that's huge experience. So have you got any like maybe examples that you can elaborate on for what you just said?
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk straight into the corporate world where you would report your numbers on a weekly basis, and it was like you were shoehorning deals into the week. And the main focus was the result. The main focus was getting it over the line. The main focus was the commission. And that's not I'm not dissing my ex-employer by any stretch, because there's a lot of things I learned at Countrywide which I still adopt certain principles today. What I honestly believe is that if you're not careful, if you don't solidify the needs, if you don't really help a buyer to understand why they're buying. I'll use one example recently where a buyer came in at 925. That was their highest and final offer. They weren't going to go any higher. I just asked them a question, which was how long are you going to be there for? What's the duration do you think you're going to be living and enjoying this property? And they said, well, probably between 10 and 15 years. Okay. Can I just share with you some data about this particular house, this particular area? Because you're coming from London, you're buying in Cambridgeshire, you don't know the area, that just might help you see the future. Yeah, 100%, Matt, no problem at all. But I'm not going to increase my offer. Okay, no, don't want you to increase your offer. I don't want you to pay a penny more than you'll be happy to pay, because at the end of the day, you're going to be the one living there. So I sent them properties that were comparable to the higher level that I knew would be the price that the vendor would accept. The vendor was on at 115, went to 1 million. I knew the sweet spot. I knew exactly where it was. And 3 days later, the guys rung me up. I was on the golf course over the road. He said, Matt, we'll go to 975. That's the highest and final offer. And I said, right, okay. Now I knew I could tie it up at 975. I actually knew that 965 was enough for the seller. But what actually he got to see was how much the property had risen over 10 years, how much the value had increased, what was going on in that area, what the statistics and the local community looked like, what other buyers had seen from buying other similar houses, why the seller bought the house. And I just shared all this information and said, you don't want to buy this house if this doesn't apply to you. If these things don't matter to you, you should not buy this house. Not quite as directly reverse psychology driven as I'm making it sound on this podcast. But I wanted him to feel comfortable, confident, and clear that in the next 2 to 3 months, his decision to move into that house was only going to get stronger. So for me, my job as the agent's representative was not to alienate the buyer through price. It was to leverage the buyer through emotion.
Yeah, and I was going to say you just hit that in the head. If anybody missed that sentence that you just said, Matt, at the end there, representation. So is it that you're looking after the buyer, their best interest, or are you representing your seller the right way?
how many buyers feel and know that you're working for the seller, right? So they're immediately putting their barriers up. They think straight away, you're just going to try and get me to pay a price that I don't want to pay, especially in a market where it's probably more price related. The stories around mortgage rates, price declines. You know, if agents aren't prepared, if agents aren't aware of those things and they don't acknowledge those things, then they're only going to have to acknowledge it when they're trying to renege the price in 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks down the road. And for me, that conversation's already been had. We're not going to change this price now, right? We've agreed this price. That's what's happened. Now, the commitment from the seller is they're going to take their property off the open market with interest for you. And they're only going to do it when you've instructed this, you've done that, you've done this, you've done that. So what I then created was a commitment both ways. And, you know, the deal is due to exchange in the next 2 weeks. So whenever this goes out, and let's say it goes belly up, anyway, I'll have egg on my face. But it's one of those stories that's just most recent to me that I believe you've got to help your client to win. Because let's also talk about relationships, 10 years, 15 years down the road. Is that buyer going to come back to me?
You better bloody hope they do.
Well, if you read their messages to me, which were, Matt, thanks for bringing that to us. Thanks for making me aware of X, Y, Z. Thanks for all your help so far. I passed it on to the lady that looks after it after that, and just say, you know, I 90% believe that there'll be no reason why that buyer won't come back to me. So if you do alienate the buyer, and you do make the buyer feel like they're overpaying, or their commitment to buying the property isn't completely clear, that doubt and that trust begins to get lost. And for me, trust's at the heart of the sale. It's a relationship. It's not rapport. It's about bringing buyer and seller to a point where they both feel that they're going to win. The only way they both feel that they're going to win is if their needs are both being met. So sellers at the moment need to know that if their onward purchase is negotiable, which is what happened in this particular scenario, where they negotiated another 30 grand off of the other end, and they accepted slightly less than what they were willing to originally accept. They were aiming for $1 million really as their target. And then after some education, again, same in reverse, they got to 965. Then I got them 975. So they're £10,000 up. The buyer's £25,000 up because they knew that $1 million was the target. And then they're £30,000 better off as a seller because they've just negotiated hard at the other end with having a chain-free buyer. So all together, when you put that deal into the pipeline and you know that that's going to come out of the other end and both clients are going to win, for me, it's not just about the seller leaving the process and saying, what a great job you've done. It's about the future seller being the buyer. Because actually, I think most agents don't focus on buyers enough. They don't look at buyers as the next seller. And what they do is they alienate rather than build that relationship, and understand that that relationship that starts now on that process of negotiation or on the viewing when questions are being answered is the one that's going to bring you back to that house in 10, 15, 20 years. And you've got to be willing to play the long game in the estate agency. It's not a short game. So that's what I believe.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's Peter Sage is like a professional speaker and course creator, etc. He says he talks about goop, and it's the good opinion of other people. And so I don't know whether you agree with this or not, but certainly I was always thinking about, well, what's Terry down the pub going to say to the buyer when the buyer shows him the property details they've just seen on the property on the weekend? What's Caroline going to say in the office at work?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? I think understanding, so emotional intelligence for me, everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. It's almost like emotional intelligence has disappeared. Fuck off. We are human beings. The humanistic side, the real side of being a real, authentic, genuine, interested in helping people estate agent is going to get you way further than some robots behind a screen who can pretty much predict 80% of what you're going to say, but not in the way and in the feel that you're going to deliver it. And the only way you really get that across is in conversations. The other thing I would recommend estate agents is do not negotiate over messenger, over text, over email. This is all in the conversation. All the nuances are in the conversation. And if a buyer doesn't want to communicate in a conversation, that would raise alarm bells for me, because if they're genuinely looking to buy their next home or even an investment, it's a big conversation. If it's not a big conversation, it will be an easy decision for them to pull out. So my job is to represent the vendor 100%, which means retaining the best buyer at the best price, leveraging their needs, and making sure that on their onward at the minute, they're going to win. So one of the things I think Perry talked about in his podcast with you was talking about the onward negotiations as a separate fee. He's way ahead of me on that, but it's part of my offer to a seller, which is, let's look at the whole goal. What's the big goal? So I listed one last week. The big goal was a 50 grand difference. So they were moving to a cheaper area. They wanted a 50 grand gap. Just before we listed it, they had the classic, one of the agents has gone back and gone, oh, we'll do it for half of what they charge, 3-4 phone calls one day, we got 10, all that kind of crap, the usual sleazy shit that you hear. And I said to the seller, I totally understand why you'd be tempted and keen to hear more about fees and everything else, but tell me, why did you come with me in the first place? And they gave me all of those reasons. And I said, have those reasons changed? No, they haven't. Do you trust me or not? Yes. Do you trust the plan that we had? Yes. What's the plan with the other agent? Well, we didn't talk about a plan. So the thing is, for me, relationships, conversations, they're intertwined. You can't build a relationship in a message. Some of my messages are so, how do I put it? They're read in a way that they're not deliberately supposed to be meant. I'm sending them with these intentions. Sometimes my messages can sound quite blunt, right? So I have to really resist the temptation of doing that. I'll use a voice note to leverage, or a quick phone call. But the beefy conversations today, which is changing price strategies, looking at new plans, negotiating offers, they've got to be in conversation. It's all part of that trust.
Absolutely. And I think when you're talking about planning, planning is actually, yes, you're representing the seller. So you're almost like the seller's arm. You're the professional that understands, or the surgeon that understands how to amputate the right leg at the right place, and there to be no problems later on. But going back to your point about buyers, I've always worn the hat. Yes, I may be employed, for example, when I was employed by an estate agency and working direct, whether that's a negotiator, sales manager, whatever. But I always used to say, it's not necessarily the business that's paying me. It's actually the seller who's employed me to earn our agency some money in order for us to future-proof ourselves financially. But at the same time, I love the fact that you've said about buyers as well, because we have a duty of care to buyers. And also, how many buyers have you ever come across that you've spoken to that have said, as a matter of principle, because the agent were acting like they were some sort of high-powered lawyer, I've decided actually to walk away from a dream home?
Absolutely. And I think, just coming back to the tangible side, so the vendors really understand what value you're bringing, other than the skills that we've just discussed, and the data and the stories, stats and stories. I think you need to have stats and stories in your armory right now. You need to be able to fire any arrow at any buyer with a question, with a story, with a stat, to help them to make the right decision for them, not to convince them to pay a price that they're going to walk away from or try and renegotiate in 6 weeks. So this seller got £50,000 more because of a conversation over 3 days. And I think that Perry shared a statistic, a percentage of how much he negotiates from first offer to last offer. And I've been using the same strategy for years, but I bring it into pounds value. So what's percentage? I talk money. So from us, our first offer to offer accepted is around 27,000. So if we want to have a conversation with a seller and say, look, the last 10 sales, it's been 17,000 on average, or 20,000, or 8,000, or 9,000, and then your fee is 4,000 or 5,000 pounds. What I want to make sure is that you're not paying me my fee. It's going to be paid by the buyer. And that's when you bring that trust into the conversation. And then from the buyer's perspective, you're helping them to win by seeing the longer term need for moving and buying that house. It's a medium to long term negotiation process right now, because most buyers aren't going to flip a house at the moment. They're not going to be buying it now to sell it within a year. That market's not there right now, but there is a market for medium to long term purchases, sellers and buyers. And it's helping people to see the goal rather than the short-term outcome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And it's the whole package. And this is what's becoming really apparent with this particular podcast, is having elite level agents on. They're all talking. You mentioned plan, strategy, understanding consumer psychology, understanding what people are going to do next. Not just what they're going to do next, but understanding your local market, your local area. And like you say, you're not necessarily in the convincing business, but you are massively knowledgeable about the area that you're operating in. And again, that if an agent isn't, and the agent's representing the seller, and they're not knowledgeable about the area, they don't understand the appetites, they don't understand those nuances you mentioned, and suddenly that's it. I always say, whoever's the most confident wins a conversation. And if you're the agent supposed to be looking after a buyer, and that buyer needs some hand holding, if you're not confident in what you're saying because you don't know the information, you don't know the stats, you don't know the pounds per square footage for the good, the bad, the ugly, and the pounds per square footage for the different roads in the same postcode, and if you don't know any of that, then guess what? That's where the money comes. That's where the money comes from the seller. That's why you've been and will continue to be so successful.
I think as well, the big, it's not even an elephant in the room. It's just an obvious statistic. If you look at estate agents' fees over the last 15 years in this country and how terrible it is that they've reduced the fees down, everyone's running on this race to the bottom. And there are a handful of agents that are actually putting their fees up at the minute. And they're doing it because they know the value that they bring. And I think sellers will instruct confidence and trust over fee. So I think if you are going down this process that we're discussing today and what Perry touched on in his podcast, you will put your fees up. You're worth more. You're worth more than the market. And as long as you know what that looks like and what the differences are for the vendor and how they'll win, again, how will they win using you? Do you have a plan? Not really. Is it just Rightmove? Yes. Well, you're knackered, right?
Yeah.
You are knackered. If it's just Rightmove, you're knackered, because what you're doing is you're throwing it into a pool of hundreds of properties. Let's look at, where's the buyer for this house? Who is the buyer for this house? How are we going to go and find them across the whole country so we can find you the right buyer? Because when we've got the right buyer, is it easier for us to get you the right price? Yes, brilliant. So it's all about that for me. It's about, how do we find the right buyer for our seller to benefit and win? And when we come to the right buyer, how do we make sure that they feel like they're winning so they don't pull out 6, 8, 10 weeks down the line? And then all of the stress that's associated with that, So I think you've got to be really clear on your strategy, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. But let's talk about why. Why have you got or go to this level of detail within this industry, and why have you stuck it out in this industry for so long?
I'm a learner, and I think by the way, I've got a tendency to get bored quick, and my wife would share a lot about the fact that I'm constantly distracted, or I'm always, my middle child is me, and she's a mirror of me. So we're very, I go and put her to bed, John, right? And she's doing cartwheels on the fucking hallway. It's like pinning jelly to a wall, getting her to do her tea. But I know I'm the same. So I'm really shocked that I'm still in this industry as well, because I did nearly leave it just before I set up my own group. But what I've loved, and the bit that I always, so the feedback from God, I've had a message from a client that I mentor this morning, just giving me a LinkedIn recommendation, and it's off the charts. I went to a company in Leeds 3 weeks ago to train 20 self-employed agents, one of the best companies in the country. I love helping people. I love learning new ways to help people. I love to make sure that if I fuck up, mess up, I take responsibility, get the lesson, and then go again. So for me, I know that this industry gives me what I need. That's why I'm still in it. That's why I go into detail. So, for example, I think there's no doubt that we were all trapped in this market where we all thought we were a lot better than we were 2 years ago, right? 3 years ago. I mean, let's be honest, selling the house wasn't the challenge. It was how much you sold it for and to who. So, I know if that market comes back round, I can add more value now by doing it wrong in that market. I don't show 20 people around your house ever again, right? On one day, we'll have five of the best buyers that have been pre-qualified, who all know that there's 4 other people going round there. And I want to make sure the one that wins knows how much they've won out of the 5. And I want you as a seller to know that you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours of tidying up. In a short period of time, it would take us 6 weeks to get to that point, but you are going to win when we get to the end of this process. You will know that that's the best price in the current market.
Yeah.
So for me, I already know when another, I'd call it a seller's market, right? I know you make your own market, but a seller's market arrives. Our strategy is going to change, and it's going to be driven through certain activities like coming soon, pre-launch, phone outs, qualify. Right, here are our hot best buyers that will all meet your needs. So your time frames, they're all aware of that. They come around, they know all of it, warts and all. What happened to the wall, when it was extended, they've got all of the detail. We're not going to waste your time. Now, how many sellers are going to want that, right?
100%.
But how many of us? I remember seeing, I had guys that I was coaching and mentoring. Like, weekend was nuts. We had 4 open houses, 30 at this one, 40 at that one, 20 at this one. I'm like, fuck, what are we doing? Because you got 20 people or 30 people. That's 19 who aren't going to get it. That's 19 buyers who are going to think you're an arsehole. There's, so actually the process of selling in a seller's market, we can completely change that as well. And in reverse, do something very proactive in the market that we're in to help sellers to meet their timeframes, meet their goal, meet their needs with different ideas, different strategies. So if one thing doesn't work, we try another, but always with the goal in mind, which is to find the right buyer who will pay the right price. So I think for us, there's some crossovers with Perry's podcast with you, just slightly different terminology, language, maybe slightly different mindset around in my feelings around making both buyer and seller to feel like they've won.
I'm very much a fan of a duty of care to buyers, because absolutely today's buyer is tomorrow's seller. And so I always take the view, going back to your point about how many viewings have happened, I always take the view of, bear in mind, and I've told this story before, when I first got into this industry, I was the world's worst estate agent. I got more complaints than offers, right? And the only reason why I stuck it out was for 2 reasons. One, and the first reason was I didn't have another job to go to. 3 months in, we was expecting our first child, so I was like, oh fuck, got to stay with this, right? But the second reason is, though, I couldn't stand the injustice of sellers being lied to by the agents that were surrounding us, and I was like, man, this is so wrong. This is so wrong, and so that's why I've ended up sticking with it. But I've always had a duty of care to buyers. But for me, it's now at a place where if I'm taking a buyer to a property, they are going to buy it. I already know they're going to offer on the property before they've gone round. Right. And I know that's a level of confidence that can become across as arrogance. But the way I see it is, if they don't buy the first property I show them, that's absolutely fine, because they will 1,000,000% buy the second. And if they don't buy the second property I show them, that's purely because I don't, or someone else doesn't have it. But the method in the madness is that I want to make sure they're so well looked after, so well thought of, and given them all the advice like you've said, they know absolutely everything there is to know. They now think, oh my God, who is this guy? Wow, he's actually standing out.
Well, so here we go. Back years ago, we used to hear this term, buyers are liars.
Yeah, I fucking hate that.
Agents are fucking lazy, right? Because what they've done on that first hit is they haven't qualified needs. What they've done is they've asked the shit questions like, okay, when do you want to go? And we'll book you in for then. And what else are you looking for? What do you want? And so on and so forth. And actually, agents that really go into detail, as in straight questions, not loads of questions, but getting to the heart of someone's needs to move, I think will deliver a far better experience when they get to clients' viewings than the agents that are just booking people in simultaneously. And I like you've just said, for me, you've got to remember that, and I love that saying, and I've heard it before, which is, today's buyers are tomorrow's sellers. And there's can't remember or quote the statistic, but there's a very low percentage of buyers that go back to the agent they bought through.
Yeah.
So there's the opportunity, agents, is impress the buyers, not by making them pay a shit price, by actually making them understand the emotional reasons for buying that house and the logical justification of price. And I think if you can do that, you are in the elite group of estate agents of about 1%.
So I got absolutely slaughtered once on my TikTok channel because I knew that 3 other agents had valued this house at 450,000. And I said to the owners, 530. So there's an 80 grand difference. And the owner said, we're not going to give you this property, mate. You've clearly overvalued to win the instruction. So absolutely not, no chance. And I said, guys, I haven't. I really haven't. All I'm asking for is one opportunity. I don't even want you to market the property. I don't want you to sign my contract. I want you to send me an email confirming you'll pay my fee if I'm successful. But I just want one viewing. One viewing. So, of course, the guy that bought it paid £80,000 more than what the other agents were saying it was worth. And they were like, how the fuck did you do that? This is the sellers. And it was like, because I knew to within an inch of its life who that buyer was.
That's going back, right, John. That's sorry to cut across you, but that is exactly, so that buyer, though they've paid 80 grand more than they probably don't even know what another agent valued it at, the fact that you got to understand them means they're going to understand that you are the right person to go back to.
Absolutely.
No,
that's exactly right. And but to your point about understanding the nuances of the area, the appetite of the area, that's the same reason why your buyer has raised his price, was because of the information that you had shared with him, probably before the viewing, during the viewing, after the viewing, was the same reason that my buyer also bought it, because we could see what was happening in the market, and he wasn't. He had, and people was, you mugged him off. No, I didn't. He got exactly what he wanted at a price he was prepared to pay, based upon what else was happening in the local area, which was rising. Obviously, it's not always going to go up, etc. But the point is, he got what he wanted. So I'm representing the seller. And I say to sellers when they're trying, the other agent has said another 50, 60, 70,000 pound more than you, which is generally the case, because I've no comparable evidence to support that. I always say to sellers, right, okay, fine. If the agent believe that they can get you that money that they're telling you right now, my advice would you to be is, okay, try and go and get it. Go and get it. But don't sign the contract. Do not market your property, because if you do, and the price is wrong, you'll end up ruining your own event. But they must bring their top 5 buyers around within the next 7 days, because if they genuinely believe they can do that, they will be able to do that. But I know.
We just had one. It's on for $1 million. The vendors won $1 million. Classic. They've got no time frame. We've got a couple of years.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've got 930. We've looked at the statistics, and the statistics would say that house, that specific house, and when they've bought it, to what they've done and where they are, is worth 925. Now, I could hit them with that figure, and then they would still probably want to stick to their guns. But just what you just talked about, for me, it's about really understanding the time frame of the buyers and how long they're looking to live there. They've gone up to 955. The sellers have come down. I think it's going to tie at 960. And the reason for that is it's going back to the emotional reason. Well, why now and not 2 years? And going back to your buyer wants to live in that house. This is where you're going to spend 7 nights a week, 365 days a year for 10 years. Do you want to buy the second choice out there in the market? Or do you want to buy the first choice and live, God knows how many hours that works out, in a house that you're really proud to own? Now, that's your choice. If you want to stick to price, then you're not going to get to live in this house. That's fine. So I think for me, it's about being confident, understanding, empathetic, but creating urgency through asking the right questions. I think from a seller's perspective, I think sellers, they need more from us as agents today. They need us to be better at what we do. We need, as an industry, to raise things like fees and the way we operate. And I'm a great believer that an agent's fee is an agent's belief, right? And the belief comes from what you intrinsically believe you're worth by what you do, what value you bring. So that's where with clients that I mentor, the first thing I say is, tell me about your fees. Tell me about your service. What do you do that's different? What do you do and when we get to the nuts and the bolts with most people, it's not a lot different, right? So if you don't know what your differences are, you then run the race to the bottom. You put your shorts on, you put your top on, you put your trainers on, and then it's a case of price and fee. And I think that's where, when we talk pricing with a seller, I'll always talk it with you. John, look, the prices, I've sold loads of houses for way more than I expected. And in recent markets, probably 2 or 3 years ago, that was more the case. But I've also, in the recent market, sold properties for a lot less than I would have expected. So there's no science here. So what we're going to do at the end of this is we're going to come up with 2 strategies. There's a strategy A, strategy B, and you are going to tell me which one works for you and your timeframes. So I think the pricing situation for anyone listing a house is a more exciting conversation than the one that we used to have in the corporate days. You know, when you'd go, right, okay, so the price, I've written down a figure. Why don't you write one down as well? I think John says 200,000. You go, oh, that's exactly right. Or you know, the riskier strategy back then was, well, I think 200,000, and you'd see the reaction. You go, worst case scenario, but 220. You know, we can go on at 220. And I think for me, actually, you know, the anxiety that brings creates a falseness in your approach. And I think for me, if a seller can see the market, the statistics, the buying level, the kind of buyer that we want to sell to, and that their timeframes are a bit more, they've got a bit more flexibility, a bit longer to go, then we can go down the pathway that they want to go down. And that's absolutely fine. So I think this goes right the way back through the start of every conversation. It's a getting to the heart of the needs, building the relationship and trust, stats and stories, confidence, not desperation, and off you go.
Matt Giggs, you've been absolutely incredible on this podcast, mate. Thank you so much. Honestly, I could sit here all day, mate.
I'm going to go and play golf now. I haven't played for months, actually. So I'm going to head over there and have a great time this afternoon. Well, anyway, I'll be playing, so we'll see.